Madam President, from El Paso to Brownsville, my home state shares a 1,200-mile border with Mexico. If you were daring enough to attempt to walk that entire stretch, you would trek through deserts, through mountains, big cities, small towns, and maybe even stick your big toe in the Rio Grande. You get to know folks who are proud of the strong bonds that our country has with our southern neighbor, including many who have relatives in both countries. You would meet entrepreneurs whose businesses depend on legitimate trade and travel between our countries. You'd talk with local, state, and federal law enforcement officials who go above and beyond the call to keep our community safe. And I have no doubt that along the way, you could enjoy some great Tex-Mex, and depending on the season, you would find the best grapefruit you've ever eaten in the Rio Grande Valley. Our Texas-Mexico southern border is a beautiful, vibrant region with a rich sense of community that you can't find in any other part of the country. I believe it's truly unique. Throughout my time in the Senate, I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time in our border communities and work with their incredible leaders, mayors, county judges, sheriffs, school superintendents, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and countless others. Well, I'm sure you've heard the song, God Bless Texas. It's true, I believe, and the folks I've come to call friends along the border are certainly doing the Lord's work. These men and women work around the clock to create safe communities and thriving economies, something that's been especially tough during the hand they've been dealt this last year with the pandemic. But they've lived through a pandemic, hurricanes, droughts, a winter storm that presented sub-zero freezing temperatures for a week, and all have hit my state in the last 12 months. Folks in these communities, as they have throughout the country, have lost friends and loved ones. They've lost jobs, they've lost businesses and opportunities and so much more. Now they are trying to deal with another crisis, one they had no hand in creating and should not be responsible for managing alone. Unfortunately, the administration continues to play a high-stakes version of the game taboo as they try to find a word, any word, but crisis to refer to what's happening along the southern border. President Biden himself has called it a humanitarian challenge. Secretary Mayorkas prefers the term situation, and the President's Chief of Staff referred to it as a mess. The problem here isn't the choice of the word you use to describe it, but the implication of downplaying the seriousness of this migration surge. In an attempt to lessen the impact of this dramatic increase in illegal migration, the administration has revoked policies that were helping deter such an influx. It failed to rapidly provide the resources needed to respond to the crisis once it revoked the previous policies. And now, our border communities in my state, along that 1,200-mile common border with Mexico, are expected to pick up the slack. Regardless of how you want to brand what's happening, here are the facts. Last month, Customs and Border Protection encountered more than 100,000 individuals along our border. Last month alone, 100,000. That's the highest number since 2006. More than 9,000 of these 100,000 people were children, unaccompanied children, separated when their parents sent them along with human smugglers, criminal organizations, to make their dangerous trek from Mexico or Central America or somewhere else into the United States. Another 19,000 were what's euphemistically called family units, usually one parent and one or more children. Now, we know that this journey to our borders isn't safe or easy, and you can imagine that's especially true for unaccompanied children. Many arrive at our border in critical health, having endured days and weeks or even months of exposure on the road. I've heard horrific stories of physical and sexual abuse that occurs in the hands of these criminal organizations who move migrants from place A to place B. But they are nothing more than cartels, human smugglers, criminals who care nothing about the individuals that they are ferrying from their point A to point B. All they care about is the money that they make, and they make a lot of money. By law, children cannot be in the custody of the Customs and Border Protection for more than 72 hours. Within that window, they are required by law to be transferred to the custody and care of the Department of Health and Human Services. But right now, the system is so overwhelmed that thousands of children have been in custody beyond the legal limit, including hundreds who have been held for more than 10 days in border detention facilities. Axios has recently released some pictures taken inside, I believe, the Donna detention facility, showing children basically stacked end to end with trying to stay warm, trying to sleep, because the Border Patrol facilities are simply overwhelmed. The situation has grown so dire, the administration has sent the Federal Emergency Management Agency to help. And now they've set up a new influx care facility in Dallas and Midland to provide for these children. The Midland facility has experienced so many issues that no additional migrant teens are being sent there. In the first few days of operation, more than 10% of the population housed there tested positive for COVID-19, and at least one child has been hospitalized. One government official described the process of setting up the facility as building a plane as it's taking off. There's simply no reason the administration should have been caught flat-footed by this surge of illegal migration. After all, the president campaigned on promises of policies that were sure to lead to this very situation. When you remove the policies that deter illegal border crossings, what do you expect? We know that the spring months are typically the busiest for migration because mild temperatures make the journey a little less dangerous, and folks want to come to the U.S. for summer work. We know the cartels and criminal organizations are very knowledgeable about our immigration laws. They know them perhaps better than most Americans do, and they know how to navigate them. We know a flawed court ruling on the Flores settlement agreement means that even more children will come across our border because now families are subject to the same requirements as unaccompanied children. We know we have an immigration court backlog that's roughly 1.3 million cases deep. And the average time for a case to be presented in court is now 2.5 years. Nevertheless, the Biden administration, by revoking the previous policies without having a plan to replace them, has created a perfect storm that anyone could have told them would end up in this situation. We have experienced migration surges in the past, but never of this magnitude, and especially in the midst of a pandemic. Secretary Mayorkas has said that we are on track to see the highest number of border crossings in 20 years, and the administration needs to take action now to keep things from getting any worse. As migrants continue to make their way to our southern border in record numbers, law enforcement, local officials, and non-governmental organizations, notwithstanding their best efforts, are not equipped to manage the influx, certainly not in these numbers. They don't have the facilities, they don't have the policies, the funding, or the resources to manage the crisis in a fair, efficient, and humane way. That needs to change. For folks who are not from a border state or haven't spent much time at the border, it's difficult to understand just how complex the situation is. They may have learned what they think they know about the border from movies or novels, or they may have read news articles and assume border communities are dangerous or lawless places. That assumption could not be farther from the truth. But it is true that our border communities are being asked to carry more than their fair share of the weight during this crisis, when the past year has already been challenging enough with the pandemic. Like cities across the country, border communities have had to cover a range of expenses created by the pandemic. But unlike those other communities, they now have the added economic struggle created by limits on non-essential border travel. Pre-pandemic, folks from Mexico could travel across the border to shop, to eat at restaurants, and visit family members. These were huge drivers of the economy during our entire border region. But the pause on legitimate non-essential travel by Title 42 has created a serious economic strain on these communities, and leaders are struggling to understand the disconnect between the Biden administration's two very different approaches. At a recent roundtable, my friend Congressman Henry Cuellar from Laredo and I hosted recently, someone said, "I don't understand how you can catch and release the migrants and not let our neighbors across the border come over and spend money in our communities to help bolster our economy." This confluence of crises is a 1-2 punch for our border communities, and it's unfair they're expected to carry the burden of this crisis. That is the federal government's responsibility. This Friday, my colleague, Senator Cruz, and I will welcome a number of our colleagues to the Rio Grande Valley where they can hear and see about these challenges firsthand. I welcome any member of the Senate or the Congress to join me at the border at a time of their choosing. I know I benefited from the feedback and advice from the experts on the ground who are dealing with this crisis firsthand. And I'm glad to bring some of my Senate colleagues on Friday along for a visit at this critical moment. Hopefully, that will help us to find a way, along with the administration, in a bipartisan way, to reduce some of the pull factors that incentivize people to come and navigate our system. You're never going to deal with the fact that people want a better life or are fleeing violence. We all get that. We understand that as human beings, why people would want to leave that. But we also know that the cartels are getting rich off of this business model, and certainly they're incentivized to encourage as many people as possible to come and pay their extortionate fees in the process. But the combination of those at this point, both the push factors and the pull factors, especially with the Biden administration putting a green light on our border and basically saying all comers are welcome to enter the country, is creating an unreasonable expectation about what people are going to encounter, as well as overwhelming the capacity of our Border Patrol, Health and Human Services, and the Office of Refugee Relocation to being able to deal with it. And we know that the incentives involved in a catch and release system where people are asked to return perhaps months, maybe years for a future court date to consider their asylum claim is nothing but an invitation for them to not appear and simply melt into the great American landscape. And again, continue to incentivize people to come because they know they can beat the system. They certainly can game the system, and unfortunately, too often people beat the system, creating the situation we find now at the southern border. Madam President, I yield the floor, and I note the absence of a quorum.